All right, hello and welcome to Bible by Ages. I believe this is class number 16. I apologize to the online students for last week. For some reason, the microphone was not working properly and there was no audio, and I checked all week and there was no way for me to recover it because there simply was no audio. The microphone, it was off for some reason, so no sound was recorded to be recovered. So for those online students that missed last week's class, I will send you all the information that you need in an email so that you'll be able to be caught up. All right, we're going to be in Genesis chapter 37 today, talking about the life of Joseph. And we're going to pick up in verses 1 and 2. So if someone would like to read verses 1 and 2 to us, that's where we'll start.
Jacob dwelt in the land wherein his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brother, and the lad was with the son of Behar, and with the son of Zilpah, his father's wife, and Joseph brought unto his father their evil report.
All right. So normally, who's the first son listed after the phrase, these are the generations? The oldest. Who's listed here? Why? In Jacob's estimation, who is his firstborn son? Joseph is. Okay? Because remember, he worked 7 years for Rachel, and then his uncle Laban tricked him. So as far as he's concerned, Rachel is his first wife, and the son of his first wife, his favorite wife, is going to be his firstborn and his favorite son. Okay?
So they were related.
Do what now?
They was related.
Who?
Joseph and the one worked for his uncle. He worked for his uncle for...
Jacob worked for Laban, who was his uncle, and then he married his cousin, who would have been... Keep in mind, back in these days, people married half-sisters and cousins, and all that stuff was a lot more common. The idea of not marrying people you were related to is really a modern concept when you look at it. You go back even 100, 200 years, people were always marrying their cousins. Did you ever see who ever saw that old movie, Gone with the Wind? Okay, remember the girl in Gone with the Wind was in love with what's his name, the blonde-haired guy, and then they were all telling her, "Oh, you know those people always marry their cousins." So that was common back in those days. Why was it common? What did it do? What was the benefit of marrying in the? It kept the money in the family. It kept the land in the family. It kept the houses and mansions or whatever you owned in the family. So it was just very common back in those days. It's a cultural difference that we have, and of course we also know better medically that it's not as bad having cousins marry as it is having brothers and sisters. But we know from a health standpoint that it's a lot healthier for non-related people to be married. But they were related. It was his cousin, really his second cousin when you get down to it. Oh no, actually it would have been his first cousin because it was his direct uncle. So he fell in love with Rachel, and she was supposed to be his first wife, but his uncle Laban tricked him. But Jacob was not going to allow that to change his outlook on things. As far as he was concerned, Joseph was his firstborn son. Now, since Joseph was really the next to last born son, how do you think that the other brothers received this? They probably did not like it because, by the time they got to Canaan, they had been working in the fields since they were able to walk. They'd been shepherd boys and working for Dad. And here comes Joseph, and he takes the spotlight. He takes all of the father's love. The next thing we see, and I, being a father of multiple children, I see this all the time. What does it mean there in verse 2 where it says, "And Joseph brought unto his father their evil report"? They were up to something. Now, they were probably... There's two ways to look at this. Some people look at this and say, well, Joseph was just a tattletale. Okay, but hey, maybe they were doing something that they really shouldn't have been doing. I have to be careful with my kids. I don't want to give the impression that they're always going to be in trouble if they tell, because some things I want them to tell. I mean, like if one of my kids was doing drugs or something like that, I want to know. Okay? If there's something serious going on, I want to know. But at the same time, I don't like it when all they're trying to do is get one another in trouble. We homeschool, and the other day, Timothy was doing his work, and he did something that sometimes I let him do, but I normally don't let him do. He had his tablet, and he had music going while he was doing his work, okay? Normally, if he asks, can I have music, I say no. Occasionally, I'll say yes if I'm in a good mood and he's doing a good job, okay? But on this particular day, he did not ask permission. He was doing very good work. He had turned it on, and all Gene could do was try to, Daddy, Timothy's listening to music. Now, why? What was Gene trying to do? Get him in trouble. So I might have told Timothy to get off of it if I had noticed him on it, but I didn't want to give credence to this tattletale thing, so I said, you mind your own business. You take care of yourself. So there's always, as a parent, a balance between not wanting kids to be tattletales, but at the same time wanting them to be able to tell you. So I cannot tell you. I've heard it preached both ways. I've heard people preach it as though, Joseph was this little tattletale trying to get his brothers in trouble. And I've heard it preached where he was probably just concerned for his brothers and telling his dad what needed to be done. We don't know. But judging from Joseph's demeanor in life, I would say it was probably the latter. I just don't picture him being a tattletale. When I look at Joseph, I see an Old Testament shadow of Jesus Christ. Now, what would a shadow of Christ be, or a type of Christ be? When we say that something is a type of Christ, what do we mean? Well, no, not a Christophany. A Christophany is literally Jesus. Okay, a Old Testament appearance of Jesus. But what would a type or a shadow be? All right, take Isaac for example. Okay, was Isaac literally Christ? No. But why do we say that he is a type of Christ? Because of the picture that was presented when he carried the wood up the hill of Calvary, and where he was going to be sacrificed, okay? And because he was the son of promise. Remember, he had a miraculous birth. He wasn't born of a virgin, but it did take an act of God for him to be born. So there's all these parallels with Christ. Now, what parallels are there between Joseph and Jesus? Who can name me some parallels? The first thing is there anything bad ever said about Joseph? We know he's a sinner because the Bible says all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. But is there anything that you can put your finger on and say Joseph was bad, Joseph did something bad? Can you find an explicit place? You could accuse him of tattletaling here, and that's about the worst I've ever heard anybody ever accuse him of doing. And once again, we don't know if it was a tattletale or if it was done. The difference between tattletaling and not tattletaling is the motivation. All right? So, is there anything bad about Joseph in his life? All right, I'm going to pause this. This is my deacon, so let me pause this. Okay, we're back. Sorry about that. All right, so type of Christ. Why would Joseph be considered a type of Christ? We said the first reason is because there's no moral ambiguity in his life whatsoever. We know that he was a sinner, but nothing's mentioned. Kind of like Daniel. Okay, the only reason we know Daniel ever did anything bad is because Daniel said, "Lord, pardon my sin." So as J. Vernon McGee said, if he just kept his mouth shut, he would have been okay. But he gave himself away. What's another reason that Joseph would be a type of Christ? All right, who is the primary people that worship Jesus today? All right, what are national-wise? Gentiles, okay? Who rejected Jesus? The Jews, okay? So who rejected Joseph and who accepted Joseph as a ruler? There you go. His brothers rejected him, and when the time came, his brothers did not even recognize him, just like today the Jews are blinded to the identity of Jesus. So there's all these different parallels. When the Jews finally realize who Jesus is in the book of Zechariah, talking about the second coming, what's the Bible say is going to happen when they recognize him? They're going to look on him whom they pierced and what? Weep. What did Joseph's brothers do when they finally did recognize him, when he finally did reveal himself to them? Well, they had already bowed down to him. At that point, they wept and embraced him. So once again, you have all these different parallels. Jesus came to save the world. What did Joseph do? Not in the same way that Jesus did, but in a very real way. He kept Egypt and all the surrounding nations from starving to death. God used him greatly. So Joseph, if I say Jacob, I mean Joseph. I often...
Two names get jammed.
Yeah, my two names get jammed together in my brain, but we're talking about Joseph, not Jacob. So Joseph was a very special person, all right? So I'm inclined to believe that this wasn't just him being a tattletale. So we get down, someone read verse 3.
Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors.
Okay, so here we have a specific reason why Joseph loves him more than all the others. It's the son of his old age. First of all, parents should always love their children equally. But why is it that grandparents often treat their grandchildren so much nicer than they treated their kids? Has anybody else ever noticed that?
Yeah.
My mama used to talk about the fact that when my grandmother would spank her as a little girl, she'd leave stripes down her leg. Okay, Mama, when she spanked my mama, she spanked her hard. My mama couldn't go after me with a fly swatter without my grandmama saying, "You're abusing that baby." I could do no wrong in my grandmother's eyes. So I guess when people get older, they become more of a doting, person. I try to treat all my children the same, but I have noticed that I kind of expect more of my firstborn than I do of my twin babies. Although a lot of that has to do with the age difference. But we're told that Israel or Joseph loved Joseph more than all of his children. So he took it a way too far. And then notice it says it made him a coat of many colors. Now this is where Joseph was really taking it to an extreme. He was making sure that everyone knew this was the favorite. And I've read some scholars say that coat of many colors signifies that he was saying Joseph is the heir. And indeed, later, how much does Joseph get above his brethren? He gets a double portion. Why is there no tribe of Joseph in the 12 tribes of Israel?
Because he had already gotten his or something.
Because each of his sons became a tribe. Okay? So Joseph has two tribes. There is a place where Joseph is listed, but Joseph is technically two tribes. Manasseh and what was the other one, Christian? Ephraim. So this coat of many colors really would have made Joseph stand out amongst his brethren. And in fact, it says in verse 4, "And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him and could not speak peaceably unto him." What a sad situation this must have been. This is, first of all, one of the reasons. We'll circle back to this. Notice whose sons it was that he brought an evil report on. It was the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, who were the handmaids, okay? Basically the extra wives that had been basically slaves of his more important wives. God never put his stamp of approval on polygamy. God allowed it, but it was never in the plan of God. God's plan for marriage has always been one man with one woman for one lifetime. All right. It was ungodly descendants of Cain who started polygamy, and the first man of God that ever did it was Abraham. You'll notice that Isaac didn't do it, but Jacob certainly did. Now, once again, God did permit it. And perhaps one of the reasons he permitted it with Jacob was because he knew that Jacob was going to be the father of an entire nation. Okay, so you probably needed a little bit more genetic diversity there, and I'm sure one wife would have had a hard time having all those kids to be able to have 12 tribes. But that is the beginning of this kind of thing in family, is that kind of sin. It gets carried further because the sin of polygamy then led to the sin of favoritism. Okay, remember, God, I don't think he approved of it, but after it happened, what did God do when Jacob loved Rachel more than he loved Leah? Y'all remember from last week what God did? He gave Leah a bunch of kids, and what did he do with Rachel? Yeah. I mean, remember, Leah was the tender-eyed one, the one that the world considered ugly. So who do you think Jacob spent most of his time with? Yeah, Rachel got all the love. Rachel got all the affection. Rachel got all the time with Jacob, but no matter how much time she spent with him, she couldn't get pregnant. And what little time that Leah actually got, God blessed, her womb so that she had child after child after child. We also saw that neither Jacob nor Leah at first, what did they fail to do? Nowhere is it said that they prayed. And remember, Isaac had that same problem. When Isaac's wife was barren, he entreated the Lord for her, and instantly she was able to have children, okay? It did not say that Rachel was able to have children until it said the Lord hearkened unto her. And if the Lord hearkened unto her, that means that she finally submitted herself in prayer. So there's all these lessons that we learn. So favoritism with the wives then leads to favoritism with the children. And also, what did Jacob, it's like father, like son, what kind of family situation did Jacob come up in, even though his father only had one wife? A favoritism situation. He was mama's boy, and and Esau was daddy's boy. So the way that we raise our families is going to have an effect that lasts generations. Okay, the things that my grandparents did with my parents are still affecting me. The things that my parents did with me are still affecting my children. And the things that I do with my kids, the way that I parent them, that's going to have an effect on my grandchildren and even great-grandchildren. So we have to keep in mind the long-term consequences, both good and ill, for the way that we live and the way that we carry out our duties under God. So he has this coat of many colors. You have this terrible family situation where they are divided. And someone go ahead and read verses 5 through 8.
It says, And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it his brethren, and they hated him yet the more. And he said unto them, Hear, I pray you, this dream which I have dreamed. For behold, we are binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose, and also stood upright. And behold, your sheaves stood around about, and made obeisance to my sheep. And his brethren said to him, Shalt thou indeed reign over us? Or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words.
Okay. Now, here's another situation where I've heard preachers try to say that Joseph was doing something wrong, okay? They try to say that, well, he was just asking for trouble by telling them this, because it's obviously not something they were going to want to hear. But here's my response. Did he have the dream or not? He had the dream. God gave him this dream. What was he supposed to do? Keep it to himself? I mean, he's a younger boy. His brothers are a lot older than him. His father is older than him. He's trying to figure out what it means. I'm sure that this dream got his attention for a reason. God wanted this dream known so that people would look back in the future and know that God had made plans way ahead of time. That's another thing that we learn from the story of Joseph, is that God knows better than we do, and no matter what happens in our lives, God is on the throne. I'm sure there were moments in Joseph's life where he had woe is me moments, when he was down in that pit that we're going to see, where there was no water. Okay? That's almost a picture of hell, ain't it? He betrayed by his own brothers who are up there talking about whether or not to murder him or not. And then going from being the father's favored son to being a slave in a Gentile's house. And then, even though he was a very faithful servant, he winds up being falsely accused of adultery and thrown into a dungeon. So, looking at it in the moment, everything looked horrible. Everything looked woe is me. And yet, step by step, moment by moment, we know that God was putting him exactly where he needed to be. Okay? There's times where nothing as dramatic as with Joseph, but there's times in my own life where I can see, well, God knew what he was doing back there, even though I did not understand what was going on at the time. So we learn that God does indeed have a plan. So what is the meaning of this dream? It's very obvious. His brothers will serve him. His brothers will bow down to him. And so they were angry about it. His brethren said to him, "Shalt thou indeed reign over us, or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us?" And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words. And then it says, he dreamed another dream and told his brethren and said, "Behold, I have dreamed a dream more, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance unto me." The meaning, once again, is very clear. How many sons does Jacob have other than Joseph? 11. All right. The sun is always identified with the father, and the moon is always identified with the mother. So now he's saying the entire family is going to bow down unto me. Now we're going to chase a little rabbit. Go with me to Revelation chapter number 12. What's the best interpreter of Scripture? Scripture. So going to Revelation chapter number 12. Someone read verses, just read verse 1 first of all.
And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars.
All right, what would that symbolize if we let the Bible interpret the Bible? 12 tribes of Israel, the nation of Israel. Okay, that is Jacob and Rachel and their 12 sons, the 12 tribes. As you go on to read this, it's talking about the birth of Christ. So everything in the Bible, all these dreams, have important symbolism. God wanted this dream shared because he wanted it included in the Word of God so that later it could be used in the interpreting of the book of Revelation, for example. That's one of the main keys to understanding it, is to understand the book of Genesis. So going back to Genesis chapter 37, they understood that now he's not just saying his brothers are going to bow down to him. He's saying that his father and his mother are also going to. Now, I don't think that he's trying to rub this in their face. I think that he honestly is very, confused about why this is happening. And indeed, his father rebukes him for it, as we're going to see. But then it says his father marks the saying, which means that Jacob. How would you feel if you had this son who was always arrogant, who was always selfish, who was always power hungry, who was always ambitious, and then he comes along saying something like this? What would you think? You would think that he's just making it up, or he's rubbing it in your face, or what have you. But what if you had a very godly son, someone who was always very humble, someone who was always very godly in all of his ways, and then all of a sudden come up and tell you this stuff? I mean, the only way that he could have been having these dreams is if God was giving them to him. And so it says in verse 11, his brethren envied him, but his father observed the saying. What does that mean? It means that Jacob knew there was more to it than just Joseph trying to get attention, or Joseph trying to anger his brothers. So we move on to the situation where Joseph ends up being sold into slavery. It says, his brethren went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said unto Joseph, do not thy brethren feed the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send thee unto them. And he said to him, here am I. Now think about what does it mean that he has to send him all the way to Shechem from where they're living in order to check on them? Remember the situation with Lot and Abraham? What was the situation that caused them to have to... Their herds were too big. So the fact that he's having to send his younger son all this way to watch the flocks, that shows that Jacob has so many flocks that he has to scatter them across the land. Jacob was a very, very wealthy man. God had greatly blessed him. So he says, go, I pray thee, see whether it is well with thy brethren, and well with the flocks, and bring me word again. So he sent him out of the vale of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. It says, a certain man found him, and behold, he was wandering in the field, and the man asked him, saying, what seekest thou? And he said, I seek my brethren. Tell me, I pray thee, where they feed their flocks. And the man said, they are departed hence, for I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. And Joseph went after his brethren, and found them in Dothan. Now, I don't know what they were doing there, but it sounds to me like they weren't where they were supposed to be. Okay? So, whatever it was they were doing, he doesn't go back to his father and tattletale on them, but he catches up to them. And it says, when they saw him afar off, even before he came near unto them, they conspired against him to slay him. What's the difference between first-degree murder and second-degree murder? There is a difference.
Thinking about it ahead of time.
Well, under our system, second-degree murder is you do it in the heat of the moment. Okay, there's no time to think about it. It's just you get angry and you lose control for one moment, and then it's too.
That's second degree.
That's my understanding of second-degree murder. If a state has second degree, some don't. But when you have a first-degree murder and a second-degree murder, second degree is basically a crime of the moment, okay? Whereas first-degree murder would be premeditated. In other words, you sat down and you cold-bloodedly planned it out, okay? So Jacob hasn't even showed up, and they're already talking about killing him. So how much hatred must there be for them to talk about murdering their own brother? A lot. I mean, my kids fight like crazy sometimes. The boys will fight like crazy, but you know what? They love one another. Okay? My boys, they'll fight like crazy, and then they'll be asleep together in bed, snuggle up together. Okay? So they fight hard, they play hard, and then they there you go. I guess that's the way to look at it. Okay? So it's in some legal systems, it's even a higher penalty for murdering family members. I remember reading the Napoleonic Code from France, and how did they execute people in France? Anybody remember back in the day? The guillotine, okay? So if you murdered someone, they would chop off your head. But you know what they would do if you murdered like a parent or a brother or something? They would chop your hand off and then chop your head off. It was considered worse because you had committed fratricide or patricide or something of that nature. So this just shows the depravity of man. I honestly wonder whether these boys were saved at this point. Although we do know it's possible for saved people to commit some pretty heinous sins if they hated him enough. So they said to one another, verse 19, behold, let me go down, this dreamer behold, this dreamer cometh. Come now therefore, and let us slay him, and cast him into some pit. And we will say, some evil beast hath devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dream. So they were really, really angry at the idea that he was going to lord it over them one day. Now, you can say something good for Reuben here. What's it say? Someone read verse 21.
Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands, and said, "Let us not kill him."
All right. So Reuben said unto them, "Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness, and lay no hand upon him, that he might rid him out of their hands to deliver him to his father again." So Reuben's entire plan here is to get him out of their clutches and get him back home to Jacob. So they took him, cast him into a pit. Actually, verse 23, it came to pass when Joseph was come unto his brethren that they stripped Joseph out of his coat of many colors that was on him, and they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty. There was no water in it. Picture this in your mind. It's just a couple of Bible verses, but imagine them taking their brother. I mean, I just think they roughed him up quite a bit, huh? Stripped his coat off of him. What'd they end up doing with that coat? Anybody remember? They ripped it to pieces, probably in front of him, and then later they dipped it in blood so that they could say, well, some animal must have eaten him. So they cast him into a pit, and then you have the fact that the pit was empty. There was no water in it. I mean, that's a picture of hell right there is what I get, because hell is called the pit. And then to make matters worse, look what they do in front of him. They sat down to eat bread. So who knows how long he was in there before this caravan showed up. But this caravan, or this company of Ishmaelites, came from Gilead with their camels bearing spicery and balm and myrrh, going to carry it down to Egypt. And Judah, of all people, what's Judah known for? Who comes out of the tribe of Judah? Jesus. Okay? So Judah gets this idea. He says, what profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Now he's thinking, we could get some money out of this thing. If we kill him, we're not going to get anything. But if we sell him, well, then we're innocent. We haven't actually killed him. He's out of our hair forever. We don't have to worry about him inheriting everything. And we get some spending money to go along with it. So come, let's say, and here's you another parallel with Jesus. All right, how was Jesus portrayed? That's right. What did they pay for him? Price of a slave, 30 pieces of silver. I don't think they pay a little bit different price for Joseph here, I think, but it's still silver that is paid. Do what now? 20 pieces, yeah. And it may have just been that the weight of the silver was different, but it's about the same. They probably haggled over the price. Come now, therefore, let us slay him, cast him in some pit. We'll say, no, past that part. Let's go down here. Then there passed by Midianite merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they brought Joseph into Egypt. And Reuben returned into the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit, and he rent his clothes. So that kind of tells me that Reuben was away while this was transpiring. What do y'all think? Because it seems like he's surprised that Joseph was not in the pit. Now, I imagine they told him, and then his crime would have been not telling Jacob. Because if he had told Jacob, what would Jacob probably have done after he got through killing his sons? He probably would have gone after him. Did it have to happen this way? Could God have seen to it that Joseph wound up where he needed to be in some other way? God's all powerful, so what's the answer? Yes, God uses the circumstances that we often bring upon ourselves to bring about His will. There's all kinds of ways that it could have happened. It's the same situation with Jacob becoming the one to inherit the covenant. Did Jacob have to go in there and steal it from Esau? Did Jacob have to blackmail his brother with a bowl of stew and say, trade me your birthright? God was going to see to it one way or another that things worked out, okay? but God often works through our circumstances, and God often works in spite of our bad decisions. So they took Joseph's coat, killed a kid of the goats, dipped the coat in the blood, and they sent the coat of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, "This have we found. Know now whether it be thy son's coat or no." Do you know what I think of when I read this right here? I think about what happened decades earlier when Isaac, with his blind eyes, looked up at Jacob and said, "Are you really my son Esau?" And what did he say? "I am." He lied to his father's face. What's Jacob reaping? He's reaping what he sowed. All right, that's a law that we see applied again and again and again in the Bible, is the law of reaping and sowing. He lied to his father's face, deceiving his father in the worst possible way, and now his own sons are visiting that same deception upon his head in an even worse way. So he knew that it was Joseph's coat, and he said, "It is my son's coat. An evil beast hath devoured him. Joseph is without doubt rent in pieces." And Jacob rent his clothes and put sackcloth upon his loins and mourned for his son many days. I told y'all today in prayer requests, my stepfather just lost his son. It happened 2 days ago. And I mean, this is one of the toughest guys I've ever known in my life. If you ever met my stepfather, he used to be a professional fighter. I mean, like he was in the martial arts and boxing and all this stuff. I mean, I've never seen the man this sad and this weak. So, I mean, your heart has to go out to any father that loses his son, and that's where Jacob is at. What does it mean to rent your clothes?
Tear 'em.
Yeah, to tear him, but what's the meaning behind it? Yeah, grief. It's a sign of intense grief when someone, that's part of the Jewish culture, is that they rip their clothes in grief. And then he puts on sackcloth upon his loins and mourned for his son many days. And it says, all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. Always. He refused to be comforted. And he said, "For I will go down into the grave unto my son mourning." So a lot of translations actually bear that out. It says Sheol. There it is. Look at the ASV. "And all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, For I will go down to Sheol to my son mourning. And his father wept for him." So what does that mean? I'll go down to Sheol weeping. He says, I'm not going to be happy until I what? He's not going to be happy until he dies. What does he believe will happen when he dies? What is Sheol? Well, it's translated hell in the King James, but that's not the most accurate translation, okay? Sheol is the place of the dead. So remember, like this thing here so they can...
Like a waiting.
It was a waiting area. That's exactly right. You had, like Brother George used to draw it. Here's the tomb. Here's Calvary. Here's the crosses. All right. What did Jesus say to the penitent thief, the thief that got saved?
You will be with me in paradise.
Today you will be with me in paradise. So Jesus went down, the Bible says, into the lower parts of the earth. So the lower parts of the earth, back in the Old Testament before Jesus died, you had paradise over here, where Abraham was at, with Lazarus. And then over here, you have what we would today call hell, place with fire. This is where the rich man was at. Torment. And you'll remember that there was what's called a great gulf fixed Remember, the rich man in hell, he was able not just to see Abraham and Lazarus over here. What else was he able to do? He was able to cry out over that gulf and say, Father Abraham, send Lazarus that he may dip his finger in water and cool my tongue. All he wanted was one drop of water. I remember Brother Mitch Anderle at church camp. He was always very effective with the kids. He was preaching once at church camp. You know how Brother Christian sometimes will have a little thing of water there on the pulpit for us to drink? He did this with the kids. He took that little bowl of water, dipped his finger in. He says, you guys see that? He said that's worth all the gold in the universe to someone in hell. Because this is more valuable than the whole universe to someone who's down there. Think about that. A drop of water off someone's finger. They'd give anything for that. And they can't get it. But he was able to cry out over it. What did Abraham tell him? He said, you can't come to us. And then he said, nor can anyone who would want to go to you. That tells me there were some people there who wish they could go over there and rescue the people. He says, we can't get to you because there is a great gulf fixed. Okay? There's a wide chasm in between so that you could not go back and forth. Now, the Bible says when Jesus Christ rose from the dead, he led captivity captive. So when Jesus died, all these people in paradise, they got to go up to heaven. And now to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. But the point is that there is life beyond death, and even in the Old Testament, they knew that there was life beyond death. We're going to be talking about Moses soon. And when God spoke to Moses through the burning bush, he said to Moses, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now, why is that significant that God introduced himself that way in exactly those words?
Because he said he's the God of the living. And he's trying to say that there's still...
Exactly. Jesus used that many centuries later when they were trying to talk to him about the resurrection. The Sadducees were trying to say that there was no resurrection. Jesus said, concerning the resurrection, have you not heard what God said? I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. So, getting back to our text here, he's not just saying, I'm going to go down to the grave like I'm talking about being buried in the ground. He's talking about, I'm not going to be happy until I get to Sheol. I'm not going to stop mourning till I get to Sheol. I'm not going to stop weeping for my son until I see him again. So, we'll go ahead and take a break right there, and then we'll pick back up after our 10-minute break. All right, we are back. So, picking up in Genesis chapter number 37, verse 36, the Midianites, of course, were just middlemen. They took Joseph and they sold him into Egypt unto Potiphar. Imagine what he must have felt like. I mean, we've all seen historical movies, I think, of, slavery in America, but, I mean, the same thing was going on in Egypt. I mean, can you imagine being a human being and being up for sale? I mean, people coming by and looking at you and checking out I imagine he went for a pretty good price. He was young, he was healthy, and they would have been able to tell from his hands that he probably hadn't done much work because he was the father's favorite son. So he got a reality check real quick, and it would have been easy for a lot of people to become very bitter in a situation like this. Because once again, he had not done anything to deserve this, and he might have, if he'd been a less spiritual person, held a grudge against God, but he didn't. As far as we can tell, he maintained his integrity as a Christian. Because later, as a believer, later when his master's wife tried to tempt him, what was his defense? Why would he not sleep with the woman even though she offered herself to him multiple times? What was it that he said?
It'd be an offense against God.
It would be an offense against God. So that tells me he didn't blame God for the situation that he was in, because he was still worried about maintaining himself before the Lord. So what ended up happening here in Genesis chapter number 38, we get a little bit of an interlude. I'm not going to go through it verse by verse, but basically what happened was that Judah was basically put in a situation where his son had a wife, and the Lord was angry with this guy, so God struck him dead. And so he ordered the brother to go into this woman and do the custom at the time that was later put into the law. What was under the law and under the custom at the time? What was a brother's duty if his brother died? To take the wife. That was one of those situations where polygamy was approved of by the Lord or permitted by the Lord, because it was a way of taking care of the family. Remember, they didn't have all the welfare things that we do today, but also to go in unto her and raise up seed unto his brother. In other words, to have children by his brother's wife, and then the children would be considered the children of his brother. Well, this guy didn't want that to happen, and so he took action to make sure that it didn't happen. And some people try to use this verse to say that birth control is a sin, but in reality, who was supposed to be born from this union? Jesus. And so by interfering with the act of procreation in such a way that he stopped her from getting pregnant, God got angry, struck him dead, and then later she was supposed to get the third son, and Judah did not send in his youngest son after he was old enough to have a wife, because what happened to the first two men that went into his first two sons that went in with this woman? They both wound up dead. So what she ended up doing was dressing up as a harlot, sitting by the side of the road, and then when her father-in-law came by, she enticed him, and she got pregnant by him, and that's where Jesus came from, was out of that union. So it was the Lord making certain that Jesus was going to be born at the right place, at the right time, and in the right lineage. You can go back and you can read Genesis chapter 38 in detail if you want to see all the different aspects of that story. But chapter 39 picks back up with Joseph. It says, Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hand of the Ishmaelites that had brought him down thither. And Jehovah was with Joseph. I'm in my ASV, so let me go back to the KJV real quick. So the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. So even though he was a slave, God blessed everything that he did, so that he became the highest ranking servant in the man's house. We often think there's a difference between slavery in different cultures, okay? We have a habit of equating all slavery with what went on in the South, before the Civil War, when in reality, different historical contexts were very different. For example, in the days of Israel, when God laid down the law, what were some of the rules about slavery under the Old Testament? Who can tell me some of the rules of slavery when it came to Hebrews owning Hebrews? What was its primary purpose? The primary purpose of slavery under the Old Testament was to be able to take care of people who could not take care of themselves. In other words, if I was a man and I could not feed myself and I could not house myself, I could not take care of myself, I could go to one of my fellow Israelites and I could say, let me be your slave. If you will house me, if you will feed me, if you will take care of me, I will work for you. We would kind of call that indentured servitude, and it lasted for 7 years. Then at the end of that 7 years, I was either free to go, or what else could I do, Christian? No, it's good.
You could ask to remain in the house.
Why might I do that? Why would someone do that? Think about it for a moment. You become part of the family, And I might say to myself, when I was out there on my own, I couldn't feed myself, I couldn't house myself. Here I have someone who loves me, who takes care of me, who treats me good. I want to stay with my master. And then the master, if that was the case, he'd take you before the people, and they would actually nail your, well, it was like a bore through your ear. It was a mark of honor that basically said, I belong to my master of my own free will. Okay? Now, in modern Bible translations, they have tried to steer away from one very accurate term, and that's doulos. In the Greek New Testament, what does doulos mean? Slave. All right? The old HCSB translated it as slave, but the ESV made the determination that it would be politically incorrect to use the term slave. And then Broadman changed the HCSB to the CSB, and one of the main things they got rid of was the word slave, because they didn't want to use that word. But listen, are we slaves of Jesus Christ? Yes, because we are bought with a price. He owns us. And there's a theological implication here, because if what's the difference between a slave and a hireling? A hireling has the right to what? To leave. All right? I can't remember ever getting angry and telling a boss I quit. I thought about it a couple of times. I used to work for Hollywood Video, and there's a couple of times where I thought about not telling my immediate boss, but like the regional lady who was over the whole thing. There's a couple of times I thought about telling her bye. I never did. But you know what? I could have. There might have been consequences for my work record, but I could have told her right then and there, bye, I quit, I'm not working for you anymore. And there's nothing she could have done about it. Now, do we have the right to do that with Jesus? No. All right? Under the Old Testament law, what would happen if a slave ran away? The slave, that Israelite slave that we're talking about. I made the agreement to work for my master for 7 years, but what did the law say if I ran away? It said he could not chase after you. So, do you see there's a very big difference between slavery in the Old Testament with Israel and slavery as what we would think about it in Gone with the Wind and the Civil War and before that time here in America. It was a very different thing. Now, when you move to Egypt and Rome, you had an even different situation. You had a situation where you were property where they could kill you if they wanted to. All right? A lot of times, you know what Romans would do with runaway slaves? Yeah, how would they kill them? Well, we always think about Jesus when we think about this, but one thing we need to realize is that a lot of people died by crucifixion. There were Romans, they'd have a runaway slave crucified to tell all the other slaves, this is what happens if you try to run away. But on the other hand, it was possible to become a very important person even as a slave. If you were an educated slave, if you were hardworking, you could wind up being a very important person in your master's house, and that's what happened with Joseph here. Joseph proved himself to be such a good worker, such a capable servant, that we're going to see that in the end, this guy, he didn't know what he had and what he didn't have because he had trusted everything to Joseph. Don't you think a lot of that had to do with the fact that Joseph probably very quickly proved himself to be honest? Mm-hmm. Joseph very quickly proved himself to be a moral person. How does the Bible tell us that we are to treat the Bible doesn't really talk about employers and employees. It talks about slaves and masters, but carrying it over from employee to employer. What kind of employee should we be?
Loyal, honest.
Exactly, because who are we reflecting on? We're reflecting on Jesus. That's exactly right. And we should also desire the salvation of our boss. Even if we have a bad, ungodly boss, we should want our Christian influence to rub off on them. We always want to make sure that we give a very good testimony. So Joseph obviously gave a very good account of himself before this guy. It says in verse 3, and his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer of his house, and all that he had, he put into his own, he put into his hand. So Joseph winds up running everything for this guy. Probably runs his bank account if he had it. Pays the bills, manages the other servants. Joseph is going to say later the only thing he kept back from him was his wife, which is obvious. That's the one thing that the man would not share with him. It came to pass from that time that he made him overseer in his house over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. Now here we have a wonderful picture. Let's go all the way back to Abraham. What did God promise Abraham? All right, what else did he promise him that would have bearing on what we're talking about right now? Read it. Someone read verse 5.
And it came to pass from the time that he had made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake.
All right, that's the part I'm trying to get at. The Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. What is that based on? What was the promise that was made to Abraham that brings bearing on that? It's in your book. It's under the racial blessings of Abraham. God told Abraham, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. Now let's apply that to the modern age, looking at America and looking back at Egypt. Okay? Do we have a very godly country today? Let's name some of the ills of our country to me. What? Okay, abortion. We took a good step in the right direction with that. We're not where we need to be yet, but we're a lot better off than we were before they got rid of abortion. What else? Same-sex marriage. Very much so. What else?
Taking prayer out of school.
Taking prayer out of school. We could go on and on about all the bad things. All right, what about the bad things? What all kind of things was going on in Egypt during this time period? Was there sexual immorality in Egypt at this time?
Yes.
Oh, yes. What kind of things were they worshiping? All different kinds of gods. You had all kinds of polytheism going on. What about the occult? What kind of things did when the Lord turned Moses' staff into a snake? Was Pharaoh impressed?
No.
What did he do?
Sorcerer.
He called Jannies and Janfreys to come in, and however they did it, whether it was by real black magic or whether it was a David Copperfield trick, they turned their staves into snakes. So you had occult practices going on. You had slavery going on. You had all these horrible things going on in Egypt. You had all this stuff going on in Potiphar's house, probably. And yet, why did God bless Egypt for as long as he did? Because they blessed Joseph, and then later they blessed Israel. But as soon as they turned on Israel, what did God do? He crushed them. All right? So, let's look at our country since World War II. All right? Now, I was just playing you my Over There video that I like. What do we call the World War II generation? Anybody remember? The greatest what? Anybody ever heard the term the greatest generation? That's what we call that World War II generation, the greatest generation. And in a way, you might say America was kind of at its peak at that time period. Most people went to church. Not everybody went to a New Testament Baptist church, but I mean, America was a church-going Christian nation. How much has America changed since the end of World War II? Since my grandparents' generation, your grandparents' generation passed. Yeah, near unrecognizable. Now, we had our problems back then. I don't mean to imply that that everything was perfect back in those days. But things in total, as far as morality is concerned, was a lot better than it is today. And yet, despite all the bad things that we have going on, has God continued to bless America? Yeah, I would say so. Why is it that all these people are trying to get in? People talk about how bad America is, but let me tell you something. There's a reason all these thousands of people are trying to get here. As bad as we think it may be, because, the economy is probably the worst it's ever been in our lifetimes, it's still so much better than everywhere else that people are willing to do anything to get here. God has continued to bless us. Why do you think God has continued to bless us?
We support Israel.
Yeah. I believe that it is directly tied to our support of Israel. I'm amazed that Biden has supported Israel as much as he has. But you notice there's a real push on the one half of our political system to completely turn against the nation of Israel. And when America does that, that I believe is where the judgment of God is really going to start hitting this nation. Okay? So there is a command of God that we support Israel. Now, does this mean that we have to approve of everything that Israel does and that Israel can do no wrong? Exactly. Israel can do wrong. That doesn't mean we're to pat them on the back when they do wrong. The homosexual capital of the world, where you'll find more rainbow flags than California, is Tel Aviv, Israel. Okay, so Israel has got its problems. But that being said, we are still commanded to bless them. All right? So God said, I'll bless those who bless you, I'll curse those who curse you. And we see that played out in the Bible again and again and again. So verse 6 of chapter 39. He, talking about Potiphar, left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat, and Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. So what do we see in that verse? How much does this man trust Joseph? Completely, with everything. And the reason it says that he's a goodly person, well favored, is just letting us know that he was a very handsome man, good looking from a woman's perspective, and that will explain why the wife of Potiphar is interested in him. It says it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, lie with me. What does he end up doing? We're going to read a number of things here. It says, number one, he refused, said unto his master's wife, behold, my master wotteth not what is with me in the house, and he hath committed all that he hath to my hand. There is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness? So his first reason for not doing this is it wouldn't be right by his master. But even more than that, what's he say at the end of that?
Sin against God.
Sin against God. That's how he viewed committing adultery with his master's wife. It would be a sin against God. Are there a lot of men who would have been a lot weaker? I mean, Joseph was a lot stronger than David was, wasn't he? Because Bathsheba wasn't even advertising herself to David. All right, he was just spying where he shouldn't have spied. In this case, it was her who was doing the lusting and the looking. And it says it came to pass, notice what it says, as she spake to Joseph, what's it say?
Day by day.
Day by day. Brother Christian, that's some temptation. To have a woman throwing herself at you every single day, making it clear that she was yours, and all you had to do was take it. He continued to say no. Verse 11, it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business. And here's an important principle for us. There was none of the men of the house therein. All right? If a person has a problem with alcohol, where should they stay away from? The bar. Okay? Do what?
Anywhere that serves alcohol.
Anywhere that serves alcohol. If a person has a problem with pornography, they need to stay away from the bars or the computer or the TV or whatever if they're able to. Okay, it's not good for a man and a woman to be alone because temptation can come out of nowhere. Am I the only one who's ever noticed that sometimes a wicked thought will come into your mind and you ask yourself, where did that come from? In our class today, Brother Christian, in the Logos class, Joe had us dealing with Romans chapter number 7 and Romans chapter number 8. Y'all remember where it was talking about sin deceived me and slew me. Okay, let's talk about that sin nature. Okay, we have got a sin nature in us, and that sin nature desires to do all kinds of wicked things that it's not supposed to do. It has that desire to be self-willed, to have what it is not supposed to have. That was that fancy word we were talking about, conspicuous, or however it was. It just basically means covetousness, wanting all those things you're not supposed to have. And it's a result of the sin nature. You don't even need the devil to have that kind of temptation. But when a man or a woman allows themselves to be put in this position where they're alone, that makes it even more likely. And notice what happens in verse 12. She caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." And I love what he does here. He left his garment in her hand, and what? What did Paul tell to Timothy?
Flee youthful lust.
Flee youthful lusts. There's a lesson for men here. There's some sins that you don't stick around and try to stand up to. That's right. Because if he had stuck around, what would have happened? It would have happened. Okay, so there's a time where the only result, the thing that you can do, is literally just to run for your spiritual life. And he got him out. And what's the saying about a woman's sperm? Hell hath no fury like a woman's sperm. When she finally realized that this godly boy was not going to give her what she wanted, she decided she was going to get revenge in the worst possible way. It says, "It came to pass, when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and was fled forth, that she called to the men of the house and spake unto them, saying, See, he hath brought in a Hebrew unto us to mock us. And he came in unto me to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. And it came to pass, when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled and got him out. And she laid up his garment by her until his Lord came home. And she spake unto him according to these words, saying, The Hebrew servant which thou hast brought unto us came in unto me to mock me." And it came, basically she's accusing him of trying to rape her. Okay?
She the one wanted him.
Yeah, she practically tried to rape him, and now she's turning it around on him. What's going on in our world today that this would kind of bring some light on? Who remembers the Me Too movement? Okay? Now listen, I believe that a woman should be believed when she comes along and says something if there's evidence to support it. But that being said, a person cannot just be called guilty because someone says something. Okay? I mean, there's a reason that you're innocent until proven guilty. But the politically popular thing in our society today is, well, if you're a male, you're just automatically guilty. So, Brother Christian, it especially behooves you and me as ministers to make sure that we're never put into a position where we could be accused of something. Because even though the Bible says we're worthy of a double honor, what is that talking about? It's not just double pay. What else does the Bible say concerning that double honor about us? I'll find it real quick and show it to you. It has to do with if people accuse us of something. 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 17. There's two things that it has to do. Read verses 17 through 19. Whoever wants to read.
Let the elders that rule well be counted worthy of double honor, especially they who labor in the word and doctrine. For the Scripture said, Thou shalt not muzzle the ox that treadeth out the corn, and the laborer is worthy of his reward. Against an elder receive not an accusation, but before 2 or 3 witnesses.
Okay, now that's not going to go down very well in our world today. Okay? But the Bible says if you have a godly pastor, someone who's taught the word and the doctrine, you don't even receive an accusation. What does it mean to receive an accusation? To even hear it. So if someone stands up in the church and wants to accuse me of something or accuse you of something, the church is supposed to say, is there another witness besides you to this? No, then we don't even want to hear it. Okay? Now, how's that going to go down in the political world today? The church won't even hear the accusation. But that's what it says. You don't even hear an accusation but before 2 or 3 witnesses. And of course, that would be if it's an elder that rules well. I have to believe that you're going to have some sign from someone if something else is actually going on. Does that make sense? I mean, there'll be signs, there'll be warning signs, and so forth. Now, this isn't a ministerial practicalities course. That's what you're teaching right now, so I'm sure you've covered this in Criswell's. Were you taught, or is it in Criswell's book where it says if you have to counsel a woman that you bring a tape recorder? Is that something that you've...
I think that might be in the book, but I know Brother Sance, he told me that if you ever have to counsel with a woman, you need to have another person there.
Right, right. My normal method is to get my wife to be in there with me, because the old lady is usually more comfortable having another lady in there as opposed to another man. So yeah, have someone else in there, or at least have some sort of recording device, so that if someone comes along and says this happened, or he said this, or he did this, and said, look, I got it on tape, to protect yourself. Because sadly today, this may be what the Bible says, but is this what would happen? No. If someone makes an accusation, you're as good as dead these days, unfortunately. But that's what ended up happening to Joseph. So he's basically accused of this, and let me scroll down. Now, do you think, I'm digging a little deep here, but do you think that the master really believed his wife?
No,
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
And the reason is because what did he do with Joseph? If he really believed it, what would he have done?
He killed him.
He would have killed him. This was a matter of pride. Okay? He couldn't bring himself to kill Joseph because I think in the heart of hearts he knew he was innocent, but at the same time his pride would not allow him to accept that his wife was lying to him. Okay? No one is better at deceiving ourselves than ourselves. Okay? I have seen it happen where a lady came to me and told me that a particular man who was married to someone else was trying to entice her into having a romantic, relationship with her. And she went and told the wife of the lady. Guess who the lady ended up believing? The husband. So, and then she was accused of chasing after the husband. So there's some situations that are no-win situations, unfortunately. But Joseph, it was the Lord in the end who had mercy on him. It says, showed him mercy, gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. So not only does he go to prison, but he's taken care of there. And just like before, it says the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison, and whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. So he kind of became like you guys. He became a trustee, like that. Have you got prisoners in the prison who do stuff like this? I mean, who basically help run things and are trusted enough to do that? I mean, I think of Anthony doing the cooking, in the morning. Y'all basically have free reign, right? You're not like locked up where you can't, get up and go different places in the facility, right? Or
we have to have like escorts.
you have to have escorts and stuff, but it's not like you're like in a lockdown or a.
I work in the sheriff's department.
Yes.
Oh, and so even the trustees are locked up now. Interesting.
So much. Oh.
Not so much. Okay.
We can't go to like the cafeteria where there's men. We're not allowed.
Okay. Okay. Well, yeah, that part makes sense. Yeah. Okay. So the keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand. The same situation arises. And we're going to see that in the next chapter, you have a couple of prisoners who upset Pharaoh and wind up in jail. So it's the butler and it's the baker. We'll wait for Anthony to get back before we do this. So I'll hit pause real quick. All right, we're back for our final period for the day. So getting back to Genesis chapter number 40, Joseph's in prison and he winds up with two new cellmates. All right, one is the butler of Pharaoh and one is the baker of Pharaoh. And it says in verse 5, and they dreamed a dream, both of them, each man his dream in one night, each man according to the interpretation of his dream, the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, which were bound in the prison. And Joseph came in unto them in the morning and looked upon them, and behold, they were sad. And he asked Pharaoh's officers that were with him in the ward of his Lord's house, saying, Wherefore look ye so sadly today? And they said unto him, We have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. And Joseph said unto them, Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me them, I pray you. Now there are people who would say that they can interpret dreams today. I used to work at a bookstore, and we had a whole New Age section that I completely hated. But I remember that there were all kinds of books in there on interpreting dreams and so forth. All right? The Bible does not approve of astrology or dreamology or anything like that. Joseph is not even claiming to interpret the dream here. Who's he saying gives him the interpretation? God does, okay? There are psychics in this world who claim they can tell the future. If they do, it's by the devil's power, and they're not going to foresee it perfectly. But when God tells the future, he tells it exactly, okay? So the chief butler told his dream to Joseph and said to him, In my dream, behold, a vine was before me. And in the vine were 3 branches, and it was as though it budded, and her blossoms shot forth, and the clusters thereof brought forth ripe grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. And Joseph said unto him, This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thine head, and restore thee into thy place, and thou shalt deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand, after the former manner when thou wast his butler. In other words, Pharaoh's not going to be mad at you forever. You're going to get your job back. But think on me when it shall be well with thee, and show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. Does that happen right away? What happens right after this guy gets out of jail?
He forgets him.
He forgets him. Doesn't that happen a lot when you do something good for someone? They turn around and forget it very, very quickly. We'll all make sure we're never like that. Verse 15 says, For indeed I was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me into the dungeon. When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said he couldn't wait to tell his, like, okay, it was a good interpretation, so maybe he'll have a good interpretation for me. So he says, Behold, I had 3 white baskets on my head. And in the uppermost basket there was all manner of baked meats for Pharaoh, and the birds did eat them out of the basket upon my head. And Joseph answered and said, This is the interpretation thereof. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head from off thee, and shall hang thee on a tree, and the birds shall eat thy flesh from off of thee. I've always wondered, Brother Christian, did he chop his head off, or did he hang him by the neck till he was dead, or what? Because it kind of seems like both. I mean, did he chop his head off, then hang him from the tree? Whatever, he must have done something to really upset Pharaoh. And I've just always wondered, what did this poor guy do? Yeah, this ASV says the same thing. Lift up thy head from off thee. So he ended up losing his head. That's what it says. And it came to pass the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast unto all his servants. And he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants. And he restored the chief butler unto his butlership again. And he gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted to them. It's my birthday today. I'm going to show clemency to one person and execute someone else. Man. But it says, yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgot him. Even so, when the time comes, what has God seen to it that happens here? Do you see the line of things that have happened to get Joseph to this point? All right? God's trying to set it up where Pharaoh's going to learn that Joseph is a man who can interpret dreams and understand them. So God has worked through all these different circumstances to make sure that everything happens in just the right way at just the right time. It says he restored the chief butler into his butlership again and gave the... Well, we already read that, so let's go down to chapter 41 very quickly. So 2 years later, Pharaoh had some dreams. And it says in verse 2 of chapter 41, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine, that would be cows, and fat-fleshed, and they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other kine or cows came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed, and stood by the other kine upon the brink of the river. And the ill-favored and lean-fleshed cows did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat kine, so Pharaoh awoke. And he slept and dreamed the second time, and behold, 7 ears of corn came up upon one stalk, rank and good. What is corn in the King James, by the way? Everybody, we read it and we think corn, but it's not what we would call corn. In the King James days, corn was maize. So what is corn here? It's wheat. All right. And behold, 7 thin ears and blasted with east wind sprung up after them, or heads of grain. And the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 rank and full ears, and Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. And it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt. So where's the first place Pharaoh goes? To the magicians, okay? As he thinks that they can use their magic and their sorcery to figure out what do these dreams mean. Do we have people, once again, like this today? Yes, we do. The occult is something that's real. The occult is something that we, brother Christian, need to preach against. And it's something that we need to keep our young people away from. You've got tarot cards, you've got Ouija boards, you've got crystal balls, you've got... there's all different kinds of things that people try to use to tell the future or to try to determine what their course of action should be. Is the devil able to manipulate those things like that? I'm not necessarily saying it's wrong for a kid to own an 8-ball, okay? I'm not trying to go quite that far. But if someone is seriously going to stake what they do on a deck of cards, or seriously state what they're going to do based off of a horoscope that they read in the newspaper, there's people who literally live by that stuff. Okay? The devil can use that kind of stuff to really mess your life up. So he's got his magicians, and he's got all the wise men thereof. Pharaoh told them his dream, but there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. Then spake the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day. Pharaoh was wroth with his servants, and put me in the ward and the captain of the guard's house, both me and the chief baker. Almost sounds like they were in it together there, huh? The baker burned the donuts, and then the butler, he dared to bring it to Who knows? We dreamed a dream in one night, I and he, and we dreamed each man according to the interpretation of his dream. And there was with us a young man, a Hebrew, servant to the captain of the guard, and we told him, and he interpreted to us our dreams. To each man according to his dream he did interpret. And it came to pass, as he interpreted to us, so it was. Me he restored unto mine office, and him he hanged. And then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon. What's the first thing he had to do here? He what? He shaved himself. Now think about this for a moment. Who's ever seen pictures of Pharaoh and pictures of Egyptian priests and so forth? What do they conspicuously lack everywhere? Hair, okay? They were paranoid about having lice and vermin and things like that on them. And so there was no way that a bearded Hebrew was going to be allowed into Pharaoh's presence here. So they shaved him, they got him all dressed up. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it, and I have heard say of thee that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it. Once again, who does Joseph give the glory to? That's right. Okay, once again, this is not astrology. This is not dreamology or numerology or whatever it is, ologies that people use today to try to interpret dreams and so forth. This is not psychology or psychiatry. This is simply Joseph saying, God gives me the answer. Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me, God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, In my dream, behold, I stood upon the bank of the river. He explains the same dreams that we just talked about. You have the 7 cows that are fat-fleshed, and then they get eaten up by 7 starving cows. And then you have the 7 ears of wheat or 7 heads of wheat, and they get devoured by the wind-blasted ones. Verse 25, And Joseph said unto Pharaoh, The dream of Pharaoh is one. God hath showed Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good kine or cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dream is one. And the 7 thin and ill-favored kine that came up after them are 7 years, and 7 empty ears blasted the east wind shall be 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh. What God is about to do, he showeth unto Pharaoh. Behold, now don't you think that's neat that God showed a lost pagan what he was going to do? Has God ever given revelation or visions to lost people in the Bible and other places? Can someone name me another place where someone spoke by the power of God and they were obviously lost? Think of the New Testament. All right, who was Caiaphas? All right, what did Caiaphas prophesy? He was the high priest. He wasn't a saved man, but because he was the high priest and because God revealed something unto him, the Bible says he prophesied it, that Jesus would die for the people and not that the whole nation should perish. So God can reveal things even to lost men. Behold, there come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt, and there shall arise after them 7 years of famine. And all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land. We are very spoiled here in America. All we have to do if we want food is go to the grocery store, or run to McDonald's or something. But you know what? I'm getting scared because I've studied history, and I know that there's such things as famines. I know that there's such things as countries having situations where there's no food on the shelves. We're not there yet, but you know what? I go grocery shopping, I see prices that are sky high, and I see grocery shelves that are sometimes half empty. I went shopping yesterday. There's a lot of things I couldn't find. I mean, there was food to be had, but it's not like the good old days where I could get whatever I wanted on the store shelf and it, was affordable. They wanted $6, more than $6 for a bag of Zatarain's rice. Brother Anthony. I ended up buying the Walmart brand. I don't normally do that because that kind of thing hurts the economy, and I love Zatarain's rice, but I wasn't going to pay $6 or over $6 for a bag of rice. That's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. Why are prices going up? Inflation is part of it, but what's another reason? Well, you may have a point there. There may be some people trying to gain control by engineering some of this stuff. But let's look at another example from history. I had a loved one of mine talking not so long ago, a member of my family, about, I could see how communism could appeal to some people. And I'm like, yeah, until you actually experience it. So back during the Soviet Union, did people have plenty of money? Did your average Soviet citizen have lots of money? Yeah. Under communism, you made as much money as a janitor as you did as a whatever, as communism, okay? Everybody had plenty of money. Everybody had the money to buy a car. Everybody had the money to buy a TV. Everybody had the money to buy a computer. The problem was there was nothing to buy. You had the money, but they had to wait in line for 2 hours to get a loaf of bread. So you can print all the money you want and pay the people all the money you want to give them, but that's not going to put bread on the shelf. It's not going to put cars in the on the car lots. You had to wait 10 years to get a car in the Soviet Union. The point I'm trying to make is that famines are a real deal, and here in America, we have a lot of people. If you couldn't go to the grocery store or McDonald's, they'd starve to death because they don't know how to feed themselves. They don't know how to grow anything. They don't know how to take a .22 and go shoot a rabbit. And when people get hungry, they start getting angry and they start getting crazy. Okay, so we need to pray to God that He has a lot of mercy on America in the coming years, because if it keeps going the direction that it's going, we could find out real quick that famines can still happen. Let's remind ourselves, what is a famine? Lack of food. Okay? Who remembers Somalia or ever saw the movie Black Hawk Down? All right? Back in the 1990s, the people in Somalia were literally starving to death. And President Clinton sent food over there, and the warlords, of course, everyone told him, if you send food, it's not going to get to the people because the warlords are just going to take it. So, and one of the only things I approved of what he did, he said, well, I'm going to send in the army to make sure those people get the food. And that's where you wound up with that Black Hawk Down situation. So, starvation is a real thing. I saw a picture in a history book. This broke my heart. There was a picture of this little Somali boy, and he was so starving that you could literally see his skeleton through the skin. His mama was giving him a drink of dirty water from this old thrown-away plastic Tupperware thing. And the thing that really got to me was I looked at how old he was, and I looked at the year that he was that it was, and he was my age. So, as rough as I thought I had it as a poor kid in Mississippi back in 1995 or whatever it was, you know what? I always had food on my table. We can always think we have it bad until we look elsewhere and see how bad other people have it, is the point I'm trying to make. And I'm scared that in the years to come, people in this country may wind up learning the hard way what famines and so forth are all about. It's sad when you ain't got nothing to eat. And that's where they were headed. And it was going to be so bad that you would have had huge numbers of people literally starved to death. It says in verse 32, and for that the dream was doubled unto Pharaoh. Why was it doubled unto him? Why did God give it to him twice? There's a warning. Look at verse 31. It shall be very grievous. God was letting Pharaoh know this is no joking matter. This is going to be so bad that the nations will literally perish because of it. Now, therefore, let Pharaoh take out a man discreet and wise and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land, and take up the 5th part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years. Now think about how much produce they would have to have for 1/5 of it to be able to feed them for 7 years. Now that sounds like a lot. I mean, the Lord, in the Old Testament, how much did He have them give? The Hebrews have to give of their produce. 10%. All right. Here He's taking 1/5. That's quite a bit. But 1/5 for 7 years was enough to feed them for an additional 7 years. So those were 7 plenteous years. God did give plenty of bounty during those first 7 years. Let them gather all the food of those good years that come and lay up corn or grain under the hand of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. And that food shall be for store to the land against the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land perish not through the famine. And the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of his servants. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, can we find such a one as this, is a man in whom the Spirit of God is? And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, for as much as God hath showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Thou shalt be over my house, And according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. Now, can you imagine the look on Joseph's face? He's gone from favored son to slave to prisoner in the dungeon, and yet God has used it all to prepare him to be the leader of a country. If you can manage a rich man's house, and then you can manage a prison, and you can budget all that stuff out, and you can organize everything, and you can run it, guess what? You can run a country. One of the reasons that I think that sometimes our own country gets in the shape that it is that you have people running it who don't know how to run things. I mean, by default, we have a political system where people get elected by being popular, not by being competent. If we had a system where you got elected by being competent, politics would be boring. And unfortunately, that's not what Americans seem to like. But God used these circumstances to get him ready. And it was recognized by Pharaoh. So only in the throne will he be greater. He basically makes Joseph what we would call the prime minister of Egypt, the second in command to the king. And he gives him the name Zaphnath-Paneah. I'm trying to find it here. Let's see. Yeah, here it is. Genesis 41:45. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paneah, which I believe means God speaks, or God speaks through him. Let's see if I can. Yeah, the one from whom hidden things are revealed. And it says Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. That's pretty young for someone to be over a country. So he goes out from the presence of Pharaoh, went throughout all the land of Egypt, and it says that he gave him Asenath as a wife. That was the daughter of the priest of On. Somewhere it talks about giving him his chariot. Yeah, here it is. It's up here. Verse 43. He made him to ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried before him, bow the knee, and he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. What a transformation. To go from the dungeon, and now he's riding a chariot, and when he comes by, what do the people do? They bow down. Not in worship so much as respect. Okay, it's kind of like with us, when the president shows up, what do we do in our culture? Well, no, if he shows up, what are we all supposed to do? We're all supposed to stand up. It's a sign of respect. Or in a courtroom, what do you do when the judge walks in? Stand up. All right. So this isn't so much worship as it is just signs of respect. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. He got that name Zaphnath-Paneah I was talking about. He was 30 years old. And he did what he said he was going to do. For 7 years, he gathered 1/5 of all the grain. And I have seen neo-Nazis and anti-Semites actually use this story out of the Bible to try to justify hatred against the Jews. Very quickly, what was it that people like Hitler and other anti-Semites, what do they accuse the Jews of? Being greedy, okay? The idea was the Jews own all the banks in Germany, and so, they got the whole nation in hock to them. First of all, in that context, the European context, why was it that Jews were often into banking and into money lending and things like that? Anybody know? Because they were outlawed from doing other things for centuries. So one of the main reasons that Jews in Germany and other countries got into things like banking and so forth was because they weren't allowed to do other things. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why they got into that. But I saw this neo-Nazi on TV trying to justify hatred against Jews by saying that they all do what Joseph did. They go into your country and then they take it over and then they sell your own stuff back to you. All right? What was Joseph doing here? Was he trying to oppress these people? Was he trying to take advantage of them? What would have happened if he hadn't showed up? Yeah, they would have died in the famine. Okay, this was government intervention, which normally isn't a good thing. But hey, if people are going to starve to death, sometimes you have to ration food. So he gathered, it says, corn or grain as the sand of the sea, very much until he left numbering, for it was without number. And Joseph got his 2 sons by Asenath. Firstborn was Manasseh, and then Ephraim. We talked about them. They became 2 tribes of Israel later. And eventually, the years of plenty ran out, just like God said that it would, and you wound up with 7 years of dearth, 7 years of famine. And the people cried out. Look at verse 55. When all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. Pharaoh said unto all the Egyptians, Go unto Joseph, what he saith to you, do. And the famine was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold unto the Egyptians, and the famine waxed sore in the land of Egypt. What kind of practical lesson can we learn from this? What's a practical lesson to be learned from this story? Is it always going to be good times? Is there going to come a rainy day? Okay. A lot of times, who here can say with me that you hit a time of need and you realize if I had just been a better steward of what God gave me a month ago, 2 months ago, a year ago, I'd be able to face what I'm dealing with right now. It's not God's fault, it's my fault. There are times where we find ourselves needing money, or needing, in this case, food or whatever. But the reason we don't have it is because we were bad stewards back in the time when we had that which was good. So there's a practical lesson here that it's good to save up for a rainy day. And it wasn't just Egypt. This is another reason why that Joseph is a picture of Christ. Someone read verse 57.
And all countries came into Egypt to Joseph for to buy corn, because their famine was so sore in all lands.
Think about how much grain must have been grown in that first 7 years. Okay, for 1/5 of it to feed not just Egypt for 7 years, but all these other countries as well. So that leads us into the next part of the story. Where's Joseph's brothers at? And his family, they're still where? They're still in Canaan. Is Canaan affected by the famine? Yes, it is. So what ends up happening is that that Jacob sends his sons to Egypt to buy the food because he finds out that it's there, and while that there's food there, and while they're there, Joseph sees them and recognizes them. So that is a interesting turn of events. It says in verse 4, but Benjamin, Joseph's brother, Jacob sent not with his brethren. Why do you think he didn't send Benjamin with him? He didn't want to lose him. I mean, he's paranoid, okay? This past couple of days ago, my wife sent my son to come get me and said, Daddy, Mama needs to see you. And I said, what? What's going on? He says, across the street at the neighbor's house. And I'm trying to figure out, why is my wife across the street at Russ's house, and why am I needed? And I go across the way, and there is a dead cat in the yard, and it looks just like my cat. A solid black cat, identical to mine. I thought it was my cat. And then a few minutes later, my son comes running up. Guess who he has in his hands? Alive.
Your cat.
My cat. All right? It turned out it was the neighbor's cat, okay, that was dead. Got hit by a car. Guess what we've been doing for the past 2 days? Keeping the cats locked in the house. Last night my dad was complaining because the cats are peeing all over everything because we will not let them out. But why are we keeping them locked up? We're paranoid about them getting hit by a car. That's what's going on here, is that Jacob is scared to death to lose Benjamin because he's already lost Joseph. And the brothers couldn't take care of Joseph, so why should he trust them to take care of Benjamin? And so the sons of Israel came to buy corn among those that came, for the famine was in the land of Egypt. And here we have the fulfillment of the dream. Joseph was the governor over the land, and he it was that sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brethren came and bowed down themselves before him with their faces to the earth. So God's prophecy came true. And the neat thing is, do they recognize him? Why don't they, do you think?
Because he looks completely different.
Yeah. Why would he look different?
No hair.
All right, no hair.
Probably.
Big Egyptian headdress, like all their leaders rule. What about the Egyptian rulers had these weird chin beards with all the gold and...
Yeah, his clothing.
Mm-hmm.
He probably been...
They would never suspected that he would have been a ruler.
Good. And Egyptians painted their eye. I mean, he would have as a Egyptian government official, he would have looked like a Egyptian. And then you have the fact that he's older. You know, that's a big part of it too. They don't recognize him at all. And we also see that he speaks to them by an interpreter, so that they don't know that he speaks their language. That way, he'll hear them speak and them not know that he knows what they're saying. So Joseph knew his brethren, verse 8, but they knew not him. And that's the same situation we have with Jesus and the Jews today. Jesus knows them, but they don't know him. Joseph remembered the dreams which he dreamed of them, and said to them, Ye are spies, to see the nakedness of the land ye are come. And they said unto him, Nay, my Lord, but to buy food are thy servants come. We are all one man's sons. We are true men. Thy servants are no spies. Why do you think, I'm interested in your opinion, why do you think that Joseph is doing this? Why is he accusing them of being spies and...
Trying to get back at them on the slick.
Okay, you think he's trying to get back at them on the slick?
Let them know. He kind of trying to let them know who he is, what they did to him. So he just doing it like on the slick, I think.
Okay, you think? Well, what do you have to define that phrase for me on the slick?
Well, instead of him telling, because like when he told them, okay, well you leave the brother here. When you go back, they're saying that's the same way that they kind of did him in a sense.
Okay. So you're saying it's payback, basically. All right, Christian, what do you think? You know the story. You know where the story's going. Okay, so think for a minute. I don't think that this is malice at all. I don't think that Joseph is trying to pay him back at all. I think he has something very specific that he's doing here. He's testing them. Mm-hmm. Okay? Everything he's doing here is designed to... Who didn't come? Who does he need? Who's his equal number? Someone that would represent him in the family now. Benjamin. Okay? Everything that Joseph enjoyed, probably after Joseph was thought dead, Benjamin enjoyed. Benjamin probably became the favored son. Okay? So he's testing his brothers as to whether they have repented, as to whether or not they have changed their hearts. He's trying to get them to force Benjamin to come, because when Benjamin comes, what does he do? Anybody remember? We're not going to go through it all verse by verse. You can go and read it. But what happens? Benjamin comes. They have a big party, and then he sends them on their way with their food. But he takes his, a silver cup, his expensive cup, whatever it is, and he says, put that in the youngest one's sack. And then after they had left, he sends his men to chase after him and says, you stole my master's cup. And they're like, none of us would have stolen anything of your master's. Whoever it is, not only we'll be your slaves and let him die. And then they open up the sack, and in Benjamin's sack of all places, there is the cup. What did the brothers have to do with Jacob to get him to let Benjamin come? Who remembers? Did Benjamin, one of the brothers got left in the dungeon. Jacob didn't care. He was not going to let Benjamin go. Why did he ultimately do it? What's going on? The famine. They were out of food. It's either we go and we bring Benjamin with us, or we all starve to death. And Judah told Jacob, if anything happens to him, let me bear the blame forever. He even said, kill my son if I don't come back. So they knew that it would kill their father for Benjamin to be lost. They come back. What were they willing to do in order to get Benjamin loose? Let's go down there real quick. So let's go down to chapter 44. And look down there at about verse 30. Now therefore, when I come to thy servant my father, and the lad be not with us, seeing that his life is bound up in the lad's life, it shall come to pass, when he seeth that the lad is not with us, that he will die, and thy servant shall bring down the gray hairs of thy servant our father with sorrow to the grave. For thy servant became surety for the lad unto my father, saying, if I bring him not unto thee, then I shall bear the blame to my father forever. Now therefore I pray thee, let thy servant abide instead of the lad, a bondman to my Lord, and let the lad go up with his brethren. For how shall I go up to my father, and the lad be not with me? And at that point, Joseph could not what? The next chapter. Okay. What point had his brothers finally come to? With Joseph, they hated him so much that they were willing to kill him and sell him off. Now here's Benjamin. Once again, everything, you better believe, everything that Joseph enjoyed, Benjamin enjoyed, because he was Rachel's last child. He was the new favored son. He was the new daddy's boy. Okay? But they had grown to the point where they were willing to give themselves up instead of him. That was what Joseph was trying to do. Anthony was test them. He was trying to get Benjamin there so he could see his brother, first of all, that was closest to, but also to see, had they changed? And I think they had. I mean, have you ever lived with guilt for years of something that you did and it ate away with you? Maybe you weren't sorry when you did it. You weren't sorry right after you did it. But over the time and over the years, it just ate and ate and ate away at you. Think about what they had to watch Joseph go through. You know, when they sold off Jacob go through. When they sold off Joseph to slavery, maybe they had in their head, well, Dad will get over it. What do you think it was like 10 years later, 20 years later, and their dad was still heartbroken and crying his eyes out because he missed his son, and they knew that they were the ones who were to blame and to cause that. So Joseph reveals himself unto his brethren, and in this we have a picture of what we're going to see in Zechariah when Jesus comes back. The Jews will finally recognize Jesus. And can you imagine what it must have been like for Jacob to find out, hey, he's alive. After all these years, Joseph is actually alive. And Jacob basically says that my son Joseph is alive. I will go and see him before I die. And so the whole family ends up coming to live in Egypt. And that's where we're going to pick up next week. Because as long as Joseph was alive and the people remembered and Pharaoh remembered what Joseph had done for them, the Israelites were treated good. They were given the best of the land to work in. But what happened when there arose a Pharaoh who remembered not Joseph? That's right. The Egyptians went from, do what now? They enslaved them. I've often wondered, did it happen gradually or did it happen overnight? I mean, literally, did you have the death of one Pharaoh and then another Pharaoh say, all right, go put them in chains and put them to work? Probably. Any questions? All right, if not, then we'll go ahead and close for the day. And Brother Christian, if you would, lead us in a closing prayer, please.